With God's help and through the prayers of the Holy Fathers, Holy Sophia Prayer House presents a video prepared on an Orthodox Christian topic. Thank you for your attention, and we wish you a spiritually beneficial and fruitful viewing. Holy King David the Builder, Orthodox Parish Union. Orthodox Parish Union. Orthodox Parish Union. Orthodoxy_national. Ideological and nationalist sentiments. Cornerstone. Tbilisi, 2011. One of the main tasks of the New World Order is the destruction of nations and nation-states that profess religions of a personal God, and the main and ultimate goal is the spiritual and physical genocide of nations and states that profess the true faith. Orthodoxy. We wrote about this in our book, The Georgian Idea, 2006. This booklet is a continuation of the above-mentioned topic and aims to substantiate the idea in a historical context. For Georgia, for our nation, it was orthodoxy that was the cornerstone of national ideology. So much so that Georgianness and orthodoxy have almost become synonyms. This close connection becomes even more important in the development of apocalyptic processes of globalization. We can declare with full responsibility the spiritual and physical salvation of our nation lies only in the confession of the true God, in orthodoxy, and its role is of paramount importance today as never before. Establishing orthodoxy as the cornerstone of national ideology and national security is the path to salvation, which is confirmed by both the historical experience of our country, the unmistakable example of the past, as well as the perspective of the apocalyptic future and the prophetic knowledge about it that the true confession, orthodoxy, possesses, a knowledge that is becoming more and more clearly revealed, a prophecy that is being fulfilled day by day. Orthodoxy _ the cornerstone of national ideology and orthodoxy _ the cornerstone of national ideology and national security. 1. Introduction. The topic of the relationship between religion and nationality is very relevant today. Both believers and non-believers speak about this topic, both adherents of traditional values, as well as those who are trying to establish a new world order on earth. The latter do not take as a guide and do not rely on divinely revealed teachings, religious experience, and historical and traditional values /U200B /U200 significant for the nation. They discuss this topic, A, in the religious Jewish aspect, within the framework of the pan-ecumenical doctrine, and B, in all other aspects, within the framework of the cosmopolitan liberal ideology. At the same time, they are using increasingly sophisticated, insidious, and often violent methods to establish a new world order, namely, under the guise of collective or personal freedom and rights, they are trying to introduce pseudo-democratic, pseudo-liberal, and amoral ideology, consciousness, and values. In this way, they are trying to erase the main defining features of the nation's spirit and consciousness, or, in their words, the main identifiers and identity of the nation, and as a result, turn it into an even more faceless part of a faceless unity. It is noteworthy that those who speak in the name of democracy are pursuing precisely undemocratic goals. The masters of tolerance and liberalism are the most intolerant, illiberal, and intolerant of dissent, merciless and violent towards individuals, nations, or peoples who carry an undesirable consciousness for them. Their consciousness bears the ugliest signs of fanaticism, and their actions, extremist, are mainly in the direction of spiritual terror. This topic is closely intertwined with the ongoing globalization process in the world, which is led by the World Judeo-Masonic Clan and its subordinates, political elite. This process, in an ecclesiological sense, is nothing more than the preparation of humanity for the rule of the Antichrist. Therefore, we will have to discuss the named topic in the context of a variety of topics and events. First of all, we should consider the real goals of globalization and the technologies that serve to achieve this goal. Understanding what globalism actually promises to humanity, especially Orthodox nations, will help us draw the conclusion that only orthodoxy can save a person spiritually and physically in the throes of future cataclysms. That a nation that bases its national ideology on orthodoxy will be more protected from demonic enslavement and destruction than other nations. Therefore, let us briefly dwell on a topic that at first glance is distant from our main topic, but in fact is closely related to it. 2. The real goals of globalization. And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had all the power of the first beast before him, and he caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast. Revelation 13 verses 11 to 12. Globalization is, in essence, an apocalyptic event and process. Globalization processes actually raise the issue of a cardinal change in the role of nation-states in the modern world. However, few realize that the most important task of globalization is the globalization of power. A somewhat detailed discussion of the issue of personal identification is beyond the scope of our topic. We will devote a separate publication to this issue, along with other issues, where there will be more space for discussing this topic. However, we should at least touch on this issue, because it is essentially related to the issue of infringement of the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual and society, the nation. It should be noted from the outset that one of the main tasks on the path to achieving the goals of globalization is the construction of a super-totalitarian, world technocratic dictatorship unprecedented in human history, during which the laws of cybernetic systems will be transferred to humanity, society, and the latest information technologies will be used for political purposes. In addition, the very concept of state sovereignty of independent states will be abolished, and all free citizens will become objects of strict control and will in fact be equated with objects and goods. Back in 1968, one of the architects of the New World Order, Z. Brzezinski, speaking of the need to manage the masses of people, wrote, "The possibilities of social and political control over the individual will increase. Soon it will be possible to exercise almost continuous control over every citizen and to produce constantly updated computer files, which, in addition to simple information, will include the most confidential information about a person's health, his behavior, and other things. And the relevant authorities will have instant access to these files. Yes, they will have instant access to these files. Power will pass into the hands of those who control this information. This determines the trends of the next few decades that will lead us to the technotronic era, dictatorship, during which the current political procedures will be almost completely abolished." Brzezinski Z. America in the Technotronic Age. Encounter. Volume 30. 11. January 1968. In 2000, at a meeting of the presidents of 8 major powers in Okinawa, the Charter of the Global Information Society was adopted, a programmatic political document that defines the formation and development of a unified world networked information cellular society of the 21st century. In essence, these are revolutionary transformations of politics, economics, and other important spheres of public life, which are carried out under the influence of information technologies. The Charter directly states about revolutionary economic and social transformations that affect people's lifestyle, education, work, and relations with state structures. In 2003, world meetings were held in Geneva and in 2005 in Tunis at the highest level on issues of the Global Information Society. At these meetings, the following program documents were considered: Declaration of Principles, Building the Information Society, The Global Challenge of the New Decade, Plan of Action for Building the Information Society, as well as the Tunis Commitment and the Tunis Plan for the Information Society WCIS 03/Geneva/DOC/5 R.12.12. 2003 WCIS 05/Tunis/Doc/7 R. November 15, 2005. The development of information technologies has already made it possible to create a universal, global computer system that allows you to track any inhabitant of the planet and manage it in accordance with the interests of the so-called world elite. First of all, this is control over any movement, as well as control over all income and expenses of a person. All this is done under the guise and pretext of good intentions to improve the quality of life and ensure peace and security, fight crime and international terrorism. In reality, A new social order is being created, which can be defined as an electronic concentration camp on a planetary scale. According to the architects of the New World Order, in a global information society, borders, states, and nationalities should be erased, money and paper documents should be abolished, and every person should become an obedient biorobot, a numbered slave of the cybernetic system governing society, like the numbered nameless prisoners of concentration camps. Why numbered biorobots? Because in the new society, people will be completely deprived of their God-given freedom of will and natural human rights, first of all freedom of conscience and the right to a personal name. According to the document adopted in Geneva, the Action Plan, e-government is being created in every country in the world, which is based on a single information software platform with uniform international standards. Over time, the e-governments of individual countries will merge with each other and create a single world system. It is precisely in those. Over time, the concept of state Jewish sovereignty will lose its real, practical meaning. What will happen to the people? Electronic government requires an electronic population. Thus, the very foundations of relations in society will change. Laws will be written, and are already being written, not for people, but for computers. The role of the person is determined to be an addition to the automatically operating computer system. In other words, it is not the technical systems that will obey the people, but the people will obey the technical systems and the owners of these systems. International agreements, Okinawa 2000, Geneva 2003, Tunis 2005, initially determined that the population will have contact with electronic government. First of all, we should note that in the global information society, a person will live according to strict, rigid rules of system behavior, which are based on network logic and network standards. These rules will contradict a person's religious beliefs and other beliefs. Thus, people will be forced to act contrary to their beliefs and conscience. Jeremiah in general, we can say that before our eyes a society is being built in which a person will have no rights and freedoms at all. From those who do not understand the essence of the current events, you will often hear the following words: "Yes, sir, let them watch us, let them control us, after all, we are honest people and we do nothing wrong." They do not understand that any control necessarily implies management. Billions are spent not only to watch, but to manage. It is precisely the management of human behavior, the deprivation of their God-given freedom, that is the main goal of the global technotronic dictatorship. Even by earthly laws and standards, assigning a number to a person instead of a personal name is the greatest crime. At the Nuremberg trials, which took place from November 20th, 1945 to October 1st, 1946, the International Military Tribunal recognized, along with other crimes of fascism, the practice of assigning a number to people that deprives them of their personality and of scaring them with this number as a life-threatening crime against humanity. Materials of the Nuremberg trials, M. 1954, T. 2, C. 865, 872, 873, 910. It is a pity that even the country's patriots do not realize the danger that the integration of a person and a country into the global information system poses. You have to be blind as a sheep. You have to be blind as a sheep, not to see what is happening around you, Paisios of Athens said with sorrow back in 1994, when he spoke about the introduction of the World Electronic Trading System. Just as a sheep blindly follows a sheep heading towards the abyss, so humanity blindly follows the sheep of this country towards the abyss. Preparation for the reign of the Antichrist has many facets: ecclesiological, religious, Jewish, legal, economic, social, cultural, moral, and others. Globalization in the Antichrist seeks to level all values, especially religious and national values, since it strives to create one nation and one faith, the leader of which, both political and religious, will be the Antichrist. The process of globalization in the Antichrist is carried out through the introduction of the standards of the Antichrist. From a moral point of view, the standards of the Antichrist imply the opposite of the standards, commandments, of Christ: debauchery, fornication, sodomy, and all kinds of abominations, the excess of which will be a prerequisite for the second coming. It is the standards of the Antichrist that determine the propaganda of depravity through mass media, the introduction of sex education in schools, the preaching of homosexuality, the liberalization of abortions, the legalization of prostitution and drug addiction, the widespread distribution of contraception, sterilization, and similar means. We are already talking about the liberalization of such evils as incest, fornication between close relatives, and pedophilia, rape, and depravity of children. As an example, we will cite the following information in the International Classification of Diseases, compiled by the World Health Organization. Pedophilia was classified as a sexual perversion in 1965. In 1973, it was designated as a deviation, and in 1993, as a violation of sexual orientation. In the near future, we should expect pedophilia to be recognized as a sexual orientation. Thus, we are witnessing an evolution in the world's sexual tolerance. One of the directions for implementing the standards of the Antichrist is the use of barcodes, tax identification numbers, and ID cards. The introduction of certificates, including biometric passports and similar documents, which are widely distributed or are beginning to spread. It should be said in advance that Orthodox Christians who receive such technologies and documents will not yet be considered recipients of the seal of the Antichrist, since a. In many cases, they are not aware of the demonized model that is hidden in the name technology or document. For example, the number 666 of the Antichrist is the basis of barcodes. B. Using these technologies does not mean receiving the seal of the Antichrist. Receiving the seal of the Antichrist implies a person's rejection of Christ, worship of the Antichrist, and conscious acceptance of his seal. B. Equipping the seal with mechanisms of full control and management. But we must know that every such standard is a step towards the Antichrist, and every Orthodox Christian must try to resist this process, to make every effort to avoid adopting such standards and documents. Otherwise, step by step, we will approach the seal of the Antichrist and may not even notice how we find ourselves in his captivity. That is why Paisius the Athonite, surprised by the negligence and indifference of people to the already existing signs of the Antichrist, Monk Paisius, the sign of the times 666, 2000, warns us so strictly. I am amazed. Why do not all of them think about these events? While the signs are so clearly visible, the beast in Brussels, with the number 666, has already swallowed all the countries into the computer. Service cards, identity cards, the introduction of the seal indicate what? What does the introduction of cards, identity cards, seals indicate? After that, the advertising of the perfect system will begin. After that, the advertising of the perfect system will begin. That is, a laser beam seal on the hand or forehead, which will be invisible from the outside, with the number 666, that is, the name of the Antichrist. Unfortunately, again some Gnostics will convince their spiritual children not to worry. It doesn't matter, it's nothing, they will convince them not to worry. It doesn't matter, it's nothing, inner faith is enough. Some modern Gnostics say a lot of nonsense. One says I will get an identity card with the number 666 and I will cross it. Another says, a certificate with the number 666 and I will cross it. The second says, I will receive a seal on my forehead and cross myself. This is a mistake. The devil Antichrist, when he is present with his symbol on a passport, on a hand or on our forehead, will not be enlightened even if we put a cross on him. We have the power of the honest cross only when we are sealed with the holy seal of baptism when, let us separate ourselves from Satan, let us separate ourselves from Satan, let us enter into Christ and receive the holy seal, the seal of the gift of the Holy Spirit. The seal of the gift of the Holy Spirit. It is undeniable that the builders of the New Babylon operate with all deceit of lies, 2 Thessalonians 10, quite skillfully replacing the concepts of true values with illusory ones. Modern revolutionary reformers, who destroy everything they promise to reform, have come to the final phase of the global revolution, to reform the very concept of the state. First of all, they propose that the constitutional obligations of the state be replaced by commercial services. We should ask those acting under the guise of democracy, what kind of democratic development are we talking about when the creators of the New World Order deprive people of the right to free choice, which God Himself gives them? Cardinal decisions are made without general discussions on the basis of government decrees and well-tested technologies, public opinion surveys, public hearings, pilot projects, and the like. In our country, the Orthodox Church enjoys the highest trust factor. Even Western-funded surveys confirm that more than 90% of the population trust it. So, what kind of democracy are we talking about when the government does not listen to the voice and calls of the unity, the Church Council, which is endowed with such a high mandate of trust? That is why we call these revolutionary reformers not Democrats, but builders of democracy. What kind of democracy are we talking about when one of the fundamental principles of international law, the presumption of innocence, is being ignored in the most brutal forms? Instead, they are introducing the presumption of guilt, the principle of every free citizen is declared a potential criminal from birth, and, according to the creators of the New World Order, that is why it is necessary to implement universal control of people, to monitor them. And these creators are going further and further. The European Commission, the government of the European Union, states that the introduction of a microprocessor device into the human body, which should fulfill the functions of a personal identification card, should be widespread. A function based on the use of the identification number carried by the microchip, which is officially called the human barcode. It is also no coincidence that the technology of applying a barcode to the human body with laser beams is being introduced in the USA and Europe. Thus, it is no longer hidden that the process of digital identification of a person will end with the application of the mark or the name of the beast or its numerical name, as mentioned in the Apocalypse. Judge for yourself. The conclusion of the 20th European Group on the Ethics of Science and New Technologies, which was presented to the European Commission in 2005 and concerns the ethical aspects of the implantation of information and communication devices into the human body, states, modern society is faced with changes that human nature must undergo. Here is the next stage of progress: the observation of people through video surveillance and biometrics, as well as various electronic devices implanted in the human body, Subcutaneous chips and smart chips changes the human personality to such an extent that people are increasingly becoming networked individuals. Such individuals should have the opportunity to view and transmit such information from time to time, the signals that allow movement, control habits, and those contacts that are subject to surveillance and evaluation. This should change the meaning and content, essence, of human autonomy. In our society, the body is a raw material that can be changed, manipulated, in order to restore functions that it has lost or to acquire previously unknown functions about which we can only say that they could exist. We have to deal with both technologies, such as the restoration of ability and the improvement of ability, through body-friendly technologies that can develop and change the concept of body care, which heralds the emergence of cyborgs, post-human bodies. This transformative intent allows for various types of scientific and technological actions and discoveries. Implants of information and communication technologies in the human body can play a major role in issues such as healthcare and can even lead to the enhancement of biological and mental capabilities. In the future, by extrapolation, this logic could lead to the transformation of the human race itself. http://ec.europa.eu European_group_ethics/docs/avis20compel_n.pdf. The collection of human biometric parameters and their placement in electronic identification and authentication devices and databases for their further use for identification and authentication directly violates human dignity, as well as other constitutional norms, the right to freedom and personal inviolability, the right to privacy, personal and family secrets, the right to protection of honor and good name, the right to free conscience, the right to religious belief and to act in accordance with it, as well as a number of other constitutional rights of the individual and society. These are rights that are not restricted in the state even under conditions of a state of emergency. Thus, the introduction of multi-parameter biometric documents, not to mention the implantation of electronic devices in the human body, is practically an action directed against the constitutional rights and freedoms of citizens, the principles that are the basis of the country's constitutional order. Based on the above, it is necessary to raise the issue before the authorities at the current stage, to adopt a legislative norm that prohibits forcing citizens to use automated means of collecting, processing and recording personal data and personal confidential information, the use of which contradicts the religious beliefs and other beliefs of the person. The law should prohibit forcing citizens to view and use any automated means of identifying a person. Many millions of believers are convinced that they should not bear computer names, should not be carriers of any identification number or code, cookies and chips, should not become bioobjects. They want to live according to the commandments of God and not according to the rules of anti-human network logic. At the end of this chapter, we note that it is precisely on the basis of revealing the essence of globalization that we say that globalization is an apocalyptic process that humanity will face in the Antichrist. It leads to globalization and integration. Only Orthodoxy has true knowledge of apocalyptic processes, which are prophetically revealed and are becoming more and more obvious and recognizable. It is Orthodoxy that has the knowledge of how a person can save himself from the slaves of the Antichrist and the soul from destruction. Orthodoxy is the only real resistance on the path to the Antichrist, which the creators of the New World Order openly and clearly point out. Remember the same Brzezinski's statement that the last disease to be eradicated on Earth after communism is orthodoxy. Therefore, Georgia, like any Orthodox country, must make orthodoxy the cornerstone of its national security doctrine, a guarantor of personal freedom, a code of conduct for public Jewish life, and the true path to the salvation of the soul by a person. 3. Nation-states in the era of globalism. One of the main tasks on the path to implementing the idea of globalism is the destruction of nations and national states that profess religions that profess a personal God. And the main and ultimate goal is the spiritual and physical genocide of nations and states that profess the true faith, orthodoxy. To achieve this goal, actions are being taken in two main directions. A. The disintegration of such states through inspired and managed ethnic and religious conflicts and the physical genocide of the nation accompanying these conflicts, Kosovo, Abkhazia, Samokablo, and B. The introduction and promotion of such individuals into the government of such countries and into the hierarchy of local churches through world pressure who will be imbued with and guided by anti-Orthodox, pan-ecumenical, and Masonic Jewish ideologies. The implementation of the anti-Orthodox plan is taking place both outside the Church of Christ, Orthodox, and within it. This process is becoming more and more widespread. The propaganda of ecumenism and panecumenism is being carried out on a wide front. Powerful information media are being used for this, which have become anti-Orthodox ideological weapons. As propaganda tools, anti-Orthodox consciousness, teachings containing anti-national values and immoral behavior, programs and textbooks are being introduced into the educational space. The corruption and degradation of the younger generation is one of the main goals. Forces are also being mobilized within the Church to reform the Church, introduce innovations, and destroy Orthodox consciousness. The so-called Eighth Ecumenical Council, which will be a council of apostates and bandits, should become a step towards further destruction of the Church. 1. Globalist liberals find their allies not only among the ordinary clergy, but also among the hierarchs. In Georgian reality, this process began with particular intensity in 2004 to 2005, although at that time the destructive actions of a small group of so-called sufficient clergy and bishops did not bring them the desired results. By the end of 2010 and the beginning of 2011, the same forces began to become active again. The process is taking place against the backdrop of persecution, repression, and intimidation by the authorities of defenders of the purity of the Church and its teachings. This time we will refrain from naming individuals too. The methodology of the struggle against Orthodox countries is most clearly and openly stated in the so-called Dulles Plan, which is currently in operation in a modernized form. If we look at this plan, it will become clear that many processes taking place today in our and other countries are carried out precisely according to the scheme of the Dulles Doctrine. Here is a short excerpt from the Dulles Plan. A grand tragedy of the destruction of the most rebellious nation will be carried out in small episodes, and its identity will be finally suppressed. For example, from literature and art, we will gradually poison their social essence. From art, we will gradually poison their social essence. We will make artists forget to paint. We will kill their desire to create. Valuable literature, theater, cinema. Everything reflects and glorifies the most base human feelings. We will support and exalt those so-called artists who forcefully instill sex, violence, sadism into human consciousness, forcefully instill sex, violence, sadism, the cult of betrayal, in a word, all kinds of depravity. The cult of betrayal, in a word, all kinds of depravity. In the governance of the state, we will create chaos and uncertainty. In the governance of the state, we will create chaos and uncertainty. We will imperceptibly, but actively and constantly facilitate officials in bribery, embezzlement, and unprincipled corruption. In corruption, decency and honesty will be ridiculed and no one will need them. They will be a relic of the past. Arrogance and dishonesty, lies and deceit, drunkenness and drug addiction, betrayal, animal fear of each other and shamelessness, betrayal, nationalism and hatred between nations. Here we will establish this imperceptibly, hatred between nations. Here we will establish this imperceptibly through local, complex-obsessed youth. Through local, complex-obsessed youth. Few will understand or realize what is happening to them. Few will understand or realize what is happening to them. But we will put such people in an impossible situation. We will make a mockery of the case. We will make them a public nuisance. We will make a mockery of the case. We will make them a public nuisance. We will uproot the spiritual roots and the foundations of the nation's morality, trampling underfoot those who have bribed us. In this way, we will gradually shake and weaken generations. We will begin to corrupt people from childhood. The main thing for the success of our work is to corrupt the youth with films financed by us, with films, TV series, books, magazines, and newspapers that have turned into pornography. With TV series, books, magazines, and newspapers that have turned into pornography. We will create cynics, pederasts, cosmopolitans from them. Here, we will create cynics, pederasts, cosmopolitans from them. Here, this will happen gradually. This will happen gradually. We think that comment is unnecessary. After getting acquainted with this plan, many things become clear. This is why they are trying to corrupt the nation, especially the young generation. This is why they have not carried out a reform of education, but of illiteracy and corruption. Everyone can already see the viciousness of the reform carried out. This is why they have ignored the code of conduct developed by the Freedom Institute, which has finally legalized corruption, violence, propaganda of homosexuality and drug addiction in television and other information spaces, as a result of which corruption flows like a torrent through information means, especially television, which threatens to destroy the youth and the entire nation. This is why they are trying to hold gay parades and introduce satanic rituals, Halloween, and the like. This is why defenders of faith, morality, and national consciousness are called fanatics, backward, ignorant, extremists. This is why young people defending faith and national dignity are arrested and imprisoned on trumped-up charges, and with the help of false witnesses, especially false police officers. This is why laws on abortion and the like are passed, and laws on the legalization of Sodom and Gomorrah, same-sex marriages, and drug addiction are put on the agenda. This is why programs that lead to genocide, degradation, and degeneration of the nation, contraception, liberalization of abortion, legalization of prostitution, so-called replacement, and similar programs are promoted and implemented. We can name many more such and this makes everything clear, What is the goal of the New World Order, and what are the ways and methods to achieve it? One significant conclusion can be drawn from the above-mentioned Dulles Doctrine, which concerns the topic we are discussing, orthodoxy and nationality. What the New World Order of the Jews brings to our country and the life of the nation is precisely the main sign, factor, indicator, or identifier that determines the essence of the soul of this nation and its consciousness. For Georgia, these factors are orthodoxy and nationality. Therefore, the issue of the relationship and purposefulness of these two main signs is interesting, which is necessarily related to the historical path and spiritual material heritage of our nation and church, which we will now discuss. In particular, these issues are 4. Historical heritage, orthodoxy, and 4. Historical heritage, orthodoxy, and nationality. Georgia's historical mission, Georgia's spiritual and state Jewish ideology, spiritual and state Jewish ideology, relations with other countries, religions, and ethnic groups. Over the course of Georgia's 20th-century history of Christian life, orthodoxy and Georgianness, or nationality, have become almost synonymous. This idea of identity has been taking shape as a doctrine, as a definition, and as a spiritual social cultural category since the second half of the first millennium. This is clearly conveyed in Georgi Merchel's description of the life of Grigol Kansteli, where the following is stated word for word: a very large country is considered to be Georgia, in which the time of sacrifice is celebrated in the Georgian language and every prayer is performed, while Kyrie eleison is pronounced in Greek 3. It is written, if the cargo is placed on the ship, if it is not heavy, it will sink, and if it is not light, it will be carried away by the winds and waves. So the burden of the law and the rule of Christianity, which is now imposed on our country, is very good and God is trustworthy. That is, in the time of Mercule, Georgia already had a clearly formulated doctrine that the country called Georgia, in today's sense, is the one that is the ruler of Christianity, in today's sense, orthodoxy, and not so much nominally, but the ruler of the living faith, the one who performs the liturgy and prayers and glorifies God with divine services. It is precisely such a country and such a confession that are very good, and the one who sees such a country is trustworthy. The idea of the identity of Georgianness and orthodoxy was not formed and accepted only in the elite, intellectual, literary philosophical space. We find the expression of this idea in wide circles, even at the everyday level. A clear expression of this is the fact that ethnic Georgians who followed the Monophysite, Armenian rule were called Armenians, Muslim Georgians, Tatars, and those of the so-called Catholic or Latin faith. 3. Kyrie eleison in this case refers to the chant in general, and not to a single kerex. The confirmation of identity with a single private kerex is devoid of any meaning. Also, the words performed in Greek should not cause misunderstanding. In Georgian historiographic sources, the Greek rule of divine services referred to divine services not in Greek, but to the Orthodox service itself, in each local church, of course, in the local language. Similarly, performed in Greek indicates that the canonical chant of the Orthodox church service was sung in the canon and typicon established for the church service in the Sabatsmidi monastery. This typicon was specially brought from the Sabatsmidi monastery by Saint Gregory of Kansteli and introduced in Georgia. It is with this typicon that divine services are still performed in Georgia today. As for canonical chant, the canonical chant of Saint John of Damascus, Octoichos, has been established as the canonical chant in the church by the typicon, which is reflected in all liturgical books without exception and in detail. Followers, the French. We would also like to note that these epithets, Armenian, Tatar, and French, did not carry a derogatory meaning. Ordinary people used these names not to belittle anyone, but precisely to confirm a sign of identity. Our topic should be discussed in a historical context. Therefore, we note the well-known fact that historically Georgia is a traditional country, oriented towards piety and morality. The consciousness and traditions of the Georgian people are based on Christianity, whose 20th-century history clearly shows that the nation has gone through many hardships. but has never come to terms with and will never come to terms with the insult of its most important dignity and values: God, the most holy Theotokos, saints and ancestors, the desecration of family and parents, our sanctities. At the present stage of historical life, we Georgians do not have a high economic potential, but we have dignity and sanctities that are more gracious and powerful, and in many cases, even powerful, than military or economic power. Empires have arisen and disappeared around us, constantly oppressing us, but we still exist, maintaining our faith, our identity, and our identity. Patriotism, first of all, means paying tribute to our illustrious ancestors, their merits and achievements, their consciousness and confession, and above all, to their martyrdom, so that we too may become their worthy heirs, their descendants and continuers of their work. The absolute majority of our country recognizes historical inheritance, not only territorial material, but also spiritual, moral, and cultural. It recognizes the historically formed worldview, expresses confidence in the bearer and preacher of this worldview, the Georgian Apostolic Church. It respects the dogmatically infallible course of this church vision and considers the church to be the spiritual leader of our nation. This historical gratitude and justice towards the nation and the church were reflected in the centuries-old history of Georgia and were taken up in the status of a Jewish state, and the anointed king appeared as its guarantor. This is how the mighty wonder was born, and Georgia, which followed this path, became a Jewish state, politically, economically, culturally, socially, and most importantly, morally. It reached its highest level during its golden age. As for gratitude and justice in our time, it was partially reflected from a legal Jewish point of view. Hopefully, it will still be implemented in the future, in the constitutional agreement between the state and the church, according to which the special role of the church in the history of our country is recognized, and therefore its rights as the spiritual leader of the nation are also recognized. Therefore, those who ignore and oppose the implementation of this agreement cannot be full-fledged heirs of our country, our ancestors, not only spiritually, but also from a Jewish point of view. Orthodoxy as the basis of a national state ideology. This is how the main provision of the Georgian national doctrine appears to us. Orthodoxy as the cornerstone of national security. This is how the only way for the spiritual and physical survival of Georgia and the Georgian nation appears to us. Such an ideology, from a political and cultural point of view, will not be oriented, but rather a balanced, self-contained policy of an independent country. Historically, it is precisely such an experience that is the most successful and shareable for Georgia, namely, authentic and not sharply expressed Western, Eastern, or Northern orientations. Not a sharp deviation in any direction, but fulfilling the role of a naturally defined geopolitical and geocultural bridge, not adaptation, but originality, cognition, and not copying. Transformation through the Orthodox national prism, not compilation. It is precisely such a policy that creates the best conditions for protecting the purity of our nationality and faith, which should be our first and highest purpose. This idea will not isolate Georgia from the outside world. Georgia is a land of the Virgin Mary, and, of course, the Georgian people are truly special, the bearers of a special vision. Geopolitically, this mission stems from the objective necessity of the existence of a connecting bridge, and its implementation is within the power of Georgia. From a spiritual and moral point of view, this mission consists in the immaculate protection and spread of orthodoxy until the second coming of Jesus Christ. This is evidenced by the Georgian, the title of kings, I saw the sword, and the entire history of our nation martyred for Christ. Christ God was crucified for the country, and we too, the Father of Christ, have taken the breast of this small Georgia, and on this breast, as on a rock, we have erected the seat of Christianity. We have used our bones as a stone and our blood as lime, and the gates of hell could not destroy it. This is how Saint Ilya the Righteous defines the cornerstone of Georgian ideology. The orthodox step taken by our church, such as its withdrawal from the ecumenical movement, the so-called World Council of Churches, is evidence of its cross-bearing nature. This has set an example of orthodoxy and perseverance for other Orthodox nations. Therefore, today, every true Orthodox throughout the world looks at the local Church of Georgia and its leader with the eye of hope, while Christ deniers and domestic and foreign blasphemers look at it with the eye of the enemy. Georgia will definitely survive and shine again. Georgia will definitely survive and shine again, but this will be accomplished by the generation that will be the defender of God's commandments and the executor of his will. Everything depends on us. So let us become partakers of the Lord's will and co-creators of a great Georgia. This is how the leader of our church, Catholicos Patriarch of Georgia Ilia II, defines the action plan of our nation. It is our historical right to consider orthodoxy as the basis of the national state Jewish ideology. It is based on the above-mentioned principle of inheritance, and no one has the right to deprive the Georgian people of this right and prohibit this choice. An ideology based on extremely peaceful, humane, and moral foundations should be officially acceptable both to representatives of ethnic and religious minorities living in Georgia, as well as to the rest of the world. In a country carrying such an ideology, there will be no place for infringement of the rights based on the morality of the individual, religious feelings, and ethnic dignity. The world is facing a turning point in history, the danger of a clash of civilizations. Civilizations that understand man and his purpose differently. Man, as the image of God, is of special value and worth. His value cannot be violated. He must be respected. The state, society, and each of us. The eternal moral law has a solid foundation in the human soul, which does not depend on culture, nationality, life circumstances. This foundation is laid in human nature by the Creator and is manifested in conscience. But the voice of conscience can be silenced by sin. That is why religious tradition, Orthodox consciousness, the primary source of which is God, is called upon to help distinguish between good and evil. Human rights are based on the value, worth of a person, and they should be directed towards the realization of his dignity. Therefore, the content of human rights cannot but be related to morality. Separating these rights from morality is their profanation, since there is no immoral dignity. The victory of the ideology based on Christianity means that our entire existence will be imbued and enriched with the centuries-old Orthodox tradition. It will contribute to the revival of the family as the cornerstone of the state, the preservation and strengthening of such virtues and traditional lifestyles as virginity, abstinence before marriage, and fidelity in marriage. It will contribute to large families and the multiplication of the nation, because the family is a small church, and the more numerous it is, the stronger it is. Therefore, we consider large families to be one of the prerequisites for the survival of the nation, and contraception, abortions, and all other family planning methodologies to be a carefully conceived plan and ideology of the genocide of the nation. We recognize the right to life as opposed to the right to death, the right to construction as opposed to the right to destruction, human rights and freedoms, to the extent that they contribute to the development of the individual towards goodness. Protect him from both internal and external evils, which allows for positive self-realization of man. In this sense, we respect not only civil and political rights and freedoms, but also social, economic, and cultural rights. Rights and freedoms are closely related to human duties and responsibilities. A person, striving to realize his interests, must extend them to his neighbor, the local community, society, and all humanity. Positive interests, because everything positive is in agreement with God. Historically, Georgia has been and is alien to persecution and oppression on religious or ethnic grounds. That is why so many ethnic or religious groups have coexisted peacefully here for centuries, even in contrast to our two neighbors, Azerbaijan and, especially, Armenia. For example, Georgia is probably the only country where there has been no anti-Semitism. In addition, we would like to emphasize from the very beginning that by exposing and rejecting the false teaching of Talmudic and Kabbalistic Judaism as the Messiah, that is, the religion of the Antichrist, we are not completely alienating the ethnic Jew, the Hebrew, whom Christ called his neighbor and commanded us to love him as himself. We are connected by a 26th century history of brotherhood and love with the Jews who follow the law of Moses. We briefly note that all the conflicts that have taken place and are planned in Georgia are inspired and aimed at the disintegration of Georgia and the weakening of the Orthodox national factor. There are values that cannot be placed below human rights. Such values are faith, morality, sacredness, homeland. When these values and the implementation of human rights come into conflict with each other, society, the state, and the law must ensure their harmonious balance. We cannot allow situations in which the implementation of human rights suppresses faith and moral traditions, which leads to the insult of religious and national feelings, venerated sacredness, and threatens the existence of the homeland. We consider it dangerous to invent such rights that legalize such behavior that is unacceptable for local traditional morality and condemned by religious views. By cunningly using certain rights and freedoms and under the pretext of protecting the rights of minorities, the so-called pseudo-liberals in Georgia today are trying to encroach on the rights of the religious and ethnic majority of our country, the Orthodox Georgians. This action is carried out with special purpose in the direction of propagating blasphemy, spreading immorality, and corrupting the younger generation. This is happening at a time when the rights of the majority, on the basis of which, in the main, the formation of the interests of society itself is protected by the second part of Article 9 of the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, which directly states that the state itself has the authority, based on the interests of society, to restrict by law the practice of such religions and doctrines that pose a threat to public order, the health or morals of the population, or the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. Therefore, if at one stage or another the state cannot provide such protection, then, based on the interests of society, society itself is obliged to protect its future generation. Here we will also quote Part 4 of Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, according to which the states signatory to this covenant, including Georgia, undertake to respect the freedom of parents and to ensure the religious and moral upbringing of their children in accordance with their own beliefs. Therefore, the state ideology of an Orthodox national country cannot allow the insult of the religious feelings and sanctities of the majority, the propaganda of immorality, and the corruption of the future generation. Whether this is carried out in the field of education or through mass media, it is well known that democracy does not ignore and does not neglect local, highly humane values, traditions, and national religious institutions of the Jewish people, especially the dominant religion. Therefore, it is quite natural that when basic values are encroached upon, then such public Jewish groups and organizations begin to operate in the country, which try to resist the spread of the ideology imposed from the outside, which contradicts the established worldview and traditions of the Jewish people. Based on the above-mentioned conventions, the activities of such organizations are completely democratic and legitimate. We reject the policy of double standards in the field of human rights, as well as attempts to use these rights to subjugate political, ideological, military, and economic interests, as well as the state and public Jewish order. We are ready to cooperate with all forces of goodwill in the protection of human rights. Special areas of this cooperation should be, and ethnic groups, ensuring the right to freedom of religion and the right of adherence to their own way of life, intolerance of crimes on national and religious grounds, protection of the individual from harassment by authorities and employers, care for the rights of military personnel, protection of children's rights, care for people deprived of their liberty, protection of victims of destructive sex. The implementation of the national ideology based on orthodoxy in Georgia does not infringe on the rights of any strata of our society, does not turn them into second-class citizens. For example, during fasting days, the sale of meat and dairy products will not be prohibited. Other similar actions will not be carried out that would limit a citizen to live in the way he has chosen and which, at the same time, does not infringe on the rights of others, does not pose a threat to public order, the security and morality of the country. We fear that fanaticism is expected precisely in the event that the pseudo-liberals who fight for God seize power, who, under the guise of tolerance, are the most intolerant and intolerant caste, an immoral and fanatical crowd. This will be the satanic darkness and spiritual terror that pseudo-liberals and pseudo-democrats are trying to introduce under the pretext of freedom, democratic vision, and protection of human rights. The ideology and propaganda of creating an international and interconfessional state on the path of the globalist process are designed for all layers of society. For us, for every Georgian, knowledge of these processes is necessary, because we are faced with a serious choice to get involved in it head-on or to try our best to preserve our own image, unique culture, and traditions. We should also remember that during the years of its statehood, Georgia had an authentic, non-oriented ideology and policy. History confirms that the orientation of the ideology in any direction led to the loss of Georgia's independence and the division of the country. Even if we recall from recent history, one such division was sacrificed by Georgia's northern orientation. St. Gilo, Lord Tasher, the Sochi region were lost, and then the border significantly shifted from all sides, from the north, from the east, and from the south. The most recent division. It is associated with a sharp western orientation. Abkhazia and Samikablo have been lost so far. There is a danger of Javakiti being separated from Georgia. Dangerous statements are being made regarding the promotion of the Muslim factor. The definition of the new role and identity of Ajara and Batumi, the prospects for creating an Azerbaijani-Georgian confederation, and the threat of Georgia's future disintegration is also contained in the illegal, clandestine construction of religious buildings without permits or consent from official state or dominant religious bodies, and the financing of foreign. Deviation and imbalance are dangerous not only from a geopolitical point of view, but also from a spiritual and cultural point of view. As we mentioned above, the mission of the bridge is the historical mission of our nation, just as Christ unites Europe and Asia in himself, St. Nicholas the Serbian, so Georgian thought. Spirituality and culture contain both Western rationalism and soulful aesthetics, as well as mysticism and spiritual contemplation characteristic of the East. Georgian culture, being a bridge between European and other cultures, creates a stunning sample, aesthetics, and faces of world culture. This is precisely the most important sign of our authenticity, our identity. That is why there is a dangerous tendency to deviate. An excessive deviation towards the West, which is clearly noticeable, will destroy the mission of this bridge role, impoverish our thinking and creativity, and greatly harm the spiritual and cultural role and mission of our nation before humanity. Therefore, our course of action in the spheres of spirituality and culture should also be based on historical experience, the thinking and patterns of the highest development of our country, the rise of spirituality and culture, its golden age. In conclusion, based on all of the above, we declare with full self-awareness, whoever wants to be a spiritual heir of our ancestors, a bearer of their faith and consciousness, a worthy successor of their customs and traditions, a full member of our country, a full legal heir both spiritually and legally, we grant ourselves the right to call on us to unite in Christ to save our homeland, to protect our national consciousness and the morality of the future generation, and to make a vow before God and the nation, a vow that will be fulfilled in the future. The Council of Urbnasai bequeathed it as the most precious heritage, as the cornerstone of the Georgian national ideology, as an oath and, at the same time, a prayer. We have not lied to you, O Holy Mother of our Catholic, Universal Autocephalous Church. Nor have we betrayed you, our glorious orthodoxy. Amen. Of Tandil Unjayads. Holy King David the Builder. Chairman of the Union of Orthodox Parishes. Adepts of the New World Order. Globalization in the Antichrist. Bushes, Pope Benedict XIV, Sarkozy, Obama, Clinton, Berlusconi. Arafat, Ahmadinejad, Hillary Clinton, Mano Cornuda. The Devil's Salute. http://www.religiae.ge. The source S translated by docs.google.com. Apologues for any errors. Hagia Sophia Chapel. May God bless you. Thank you for your attention. You have watched a video presented by Holy Sophia Prayer House. Please subscribe to the channel so that it may become more successful and its work may serve good and beneficial purposes even more effectively. May God help and bless you.